Over the weekend, we heard of reports of a horrific attack that took place in Australia. Around 15 people killed and dozens injured as two gunmen opened fire at a Jewish celebration on Bondi Beach in Australia. But this event has raised some serious questions, most notably, who did this, why now, and why Australia? Here's a viral tweet that's being shared, originally from Candace Owens. This is what she said. They've been signalling that a 9/11 style attack is coming the second week of December. Save this tweet, it will age well. This was a tweet from over 2 weeks ago at the end of November, and this attack that took place was the very last day of those 2 weeks of December. So that really throws into question, was this a false flag operation? Now, a false flag operation is when one group orchestrates an attack with the intention to blame another group. Originally, the term comes from when pirates flew flags of a friendly nation in order to ambush merchant ships. They literally put up false flags. So why do I and even others like Candace Owens question the official narrative of this terrorist attack? Now, if you've been watching my channel, you'll know that I've been discussing how Israel is attempting to divert attention away from the crimes of Gaza that they've committed in Gaza toward the Muslim community, towards the Muslims. They know they've lost the information war, that more and more people have witnessed in real time the level of destruction and barbarity of the actions of this Zionist entity. That according to an Israeli-funded research, which I've mentioned a number of times now, it recommended that the way to reclaim public opinion for Israel is to shift the attention towards Islam and Muslims. We then saw a number of Islamophobes like Tel Aviv Tommy, Laura Loomer, Apus, Valentina Gomez and others invited to Israel, probably receiving orders as well as copious amounts of funding. We also know that there are reports that have come out now that Israel are willing to pay up to $7,000 per post to social media influencers to attack Islam, Muslims and the Palestinian cause. We've even seen recently agent provocateurs like Jacob Land with his theatrical protests across Muslim areas in America, claiming he's trying to protect Christianity from the Muslim takeover, while he himself is an Israeli-American dual national that comes from a Jewish background, even with pictures of him kissing the wall. We've also seen a rise in attacks and harassments of Muslims praying in public in America. And we then also saw the banning of the Muslim Brotherhood in America too. Now, over the past few weeks, I've done videos related to all of these particular issues, demonstrating that there is a shift, an aggressive shift to push the American and Western public into a more anti-Muslim, anti-Palestinian agenda. So it seems obvious to me that we were going to expect an attack on Western capitals in the coming weeks, just to underline the claim that Islam and Muslims are a threat. And what makes me question this recent attack in Australia further is that for over 2 years, while we witnessed the relentless campaign of genocide against the Palestinians of Gaza, the utter destruction, yet we didn't hear about any of this mass shootings and targeting of Jews in Western capitals or Western cities. Yet now suddenly, after a ceasefire, and I know in practice there isn't really a ceasefire, but at least on paper there is meant to be one, that now suddenly we're seeing this terrorist attack. And what's even more incredulous is that the two individuals implicated in these attacks are meant to be affiliated with ISIS, supposedly having ISIS flags in their car that was parked up, conveniently near the attacks on Bondi Beach. The thing is, we know about ISIS how they have very rarely, if ever, targeted or attacked Israel. So it just seems convenient that an attempt to reclaim the narrative for the Zionists that this terrorist attack takes place right now. Obviously, some will, dismiss this as conspiratorial propaganda that tries to divert attention away from Muslims. But we know Israel has a documented history of false flag operations, funding of terrorist organizations, and attempting to capitalize on the death of innocent victims. It's their MO. For instance, Avi Shalem, an Israeli Jewish historian, documents from Mossad agents themselves that in the 1950s, at least 3 out of the 5 bombings of synagogues in Iraq were carried out by Zionists themselves. He quotes one former Mossad agent, his name is Yehuda Tajer, that implicated an Iraqi Jew and Zionist named Yusuf Ibrahim Basri as being behind these attacks. The purpose was meant to foment anger and division amongst the Iraqi population, the Muslim population, with the Iraqi Jewish population, in order to help push Iraqi Jews out of Iraq to help populate the newly established Zionist entity. Then we had in 1954, we had what was called the Lavon Affair, where Israeli operatives recruited local Egyptian Jews to plant bombs belonging to American and British citizens in Egypt. The purpose was to blame Egyptians and Muslims for the bombings against Americans to create a wedge between America and Egypt. Then in 1967, we had the attack on the USS Liberty, a US naval intelligence ship that at the time was in international waters. This was during the Six-Day War between Israel and a number of Arab countries, and this botched operation was an attempt by Israel to drag America into the war on the side of Israel, because they attempted to blame the attack on Egypt, yet it became clear that it was actually a targeted and repeated attack by Israeli Air Force, killing a number of US personnel and sinking their ship. It was a failed false flag operation at the time. Even with the 9/11 attacks, many now question the official narrative with claims of potential Israeli foreknowledge or even complicity in the attack. Tucker Carlson, a stalwart of the right in America, produced a documentary with a number of series fundamentally questioning the official narrative of what role did Israel have in these attacks.
We know that a group of Israeli art students, who clearly were not art students, clearly some of them were aligned with Israeli intelligence, were arrested and held for quite some time in the United States before being released without charges. And we know that a group of them, again, I'm quoting an FBI document here, not the internet, filmed the attacks on 9/11, and I'm quoting, seemed to have foreknowledge of those attacks.
As we know, Israel, with the neocons of America, used this attack to justify the utter devastation of Iraq, thereby weakening one of Israel's potential regional adversaries in the region. Even over the past few years, we've seen similar types of false flag operations or claims Muslims and pro-Palestinians are to blame being used by the Zionists. Here's an example of a French pro-Zionist faking an attack by pro-Palestinians. It's laughable. And in 2017, Michael Carter, an American Israeli, was accused of making 2,000 bomb hoax calls against Israeli airlines and synagogues. Just recently, we had a fake pro-Palestinian activist making a Nazi salute. Later, it was found out that this woman had 2 kosher cafes that operated in a Jewish hospital in Australia. And in March earlier this year, a fake terrorist plot involving local criminal gangs with links to overseas were involved in creating a fake plot to target synagogues across Australia. Even when attacks have taken place that have nothing to do with Muslims or, Palestine or pro-Palestinian causes, many pro-Zionists have attempted to link this to Muslims and Palestinians themselves. For instance, last year, Rachel Riley attempted to claim that a mass stabbing incident in Australia was linked to being pro-Palestine, claiming that for 6 months now, people have been out on the streets proudly claiming for Intifada revolution. If you want to know what globalized Intifada looks like, see the Sydney Mall, 5 victims stabbed to death and 8 transferred to hospital, including a baby, due to a man and a knife. Now, when she came under fire, intense criticism, because the perpetrator wasn't Muslim, wasn't pro-Palestine, it had nothing to do with targeting Jews or Palestinian cause, she had to then later apologize and say, well, actually, I'm sorry for making this statement initially. But it just shows you how they're trying to capitalize on any victims within the West and trying to say that this is targeted against Jews and this is done by pro-Palestinian and Muslims themselves in order to radicalize the population to be against Islam and Muslims and Palestinian cause in order to support the Zionist and Israeli state. And in terms of supporting what they call terrorist organizations, we know, for instance, just recently that Israeli funded and armed Yasser Abu Shabab and his group, even though Yasser Abu Shabab years earlier had claimed to have given allegiance to ISIS. So why do I give you all these examples? Because there is a desperate attempt to shift the narrative, and attacks like this actually help Israel and the Zionist propaganda machine. Their claim is that being pro-Palestine simply gives more justifications for attacks against Jews, that Israel is on the front line against the Muslim horde, holding them back from from them attacking the West, and that their Zionist actions, no matter how grim they may seem, are necessary, not just to protect Israel, but also the West too. That's the narrative they're trying to paint. So they are jumping for joy when they see these types of attacks. And remember, as I said, in the 1950s, they were willing to attack their own synagogues in Iraq, target their own Jewish community in order to safeguard their Zionist interests. And that's not new because, as we know, as part of the concept of the greater good, they have the Hannibal Directive, a directive that actually allows them to kill their own citizens, their own Jewish brethren, as a way to prevent them being taken hostage and therefore being used as a bargaining tool. In fact, more details are now coming out, not only that Israel had some sort of stand-down order on October 7th, and that they actually also knew about the attacks beforehand and therefore potentially let it happen, but also reports are coming out that they, Israel, according to the Hannibal Directive, killed their own civilians and then attempted to blame this on the Palestinians. Now, I'm not saying that the Palestinians or Hamas or any of these groups didn't kill Israelis in October 7th. But there is a significant number that were also killed by Israel themselves, and then Israel attempting to shift the blame, try to blame the Palestinians. All of this paints a picture that Israel and the Zionists don't have a problem engaging in false flag operations and sacrificing Jewish lives if it helps them solidify opinion for their Israeli state, their Zionist project. So why Australia of all countries? And that also seems very odd. Not only did Australia have one of the largest pro-Palestinian demos in the world recently with around 300,000 people attending, but Australia also recognized a Palestinian state recently. So it's not surprising that after this targeted attack in Australia, Netanyahu and others have used this as a claim that these attacks were encouraged by the Australian government because of their appeasement for the Palestinian cause and their recognition of the Palestinian state.
Your call for a Palestinian state pours full fuel on the anti-Semitic fire. It rewards Hamas terrorism. It emboldens those who menace Australian Jews and encourages the Jew hatred now stalking your streets.
But it makes no sense. If Australia are actually appeasing the Palestinian cause, if Australians are actually showing great sympathy towards Palestinians and anger against Zionist actions, then why would you attack Australia? In fact, Netanyahu's own words after Australia recognised a Palestinian state comes across as a threat against Australia. Look, it's clear what the Zionists want to do. They want to shift public opinion away from supporting Palestine to supporting Israel. And they're doing everything they can in order to frame this that if you support Palestine, you'll see these terrorist attacks. But one thing has torn apart their propaganda. Because you see this hero bravely tackling one of the attackers, that's Ahmed al-Ahmed. He was shot a number of times too. And the pro-Zionist anti-Muslim crowd didn't know what to make of it. So many of them just lied. Netanyahu claimed initially this was a Jew protecting his fellow Jews. Islamophobes then tried to claim that he was a Maronite Christian from Lebanon who saved his fellow Jews. All of it was just utter lies. He was a Muslim from Syria, Idlib, who had moved to Australia while others watched and cowered. He actually tackled one of the attackers, taking away his gun, and he was hospitalized after being shot by the other attacker. His bravery ultimately had to be and reluctantly acknowledged by Netanyahu, who then corrected his earlier lies by having to admit that he was in fact a Muslim.
We saw an action of a brave man, turns out a Muslim brave man, and I salute him.
Look, any sane, ordinary Muslim knows that what the attacks did was not only forbidden in Islam, but would also be used by the Zionists as part of their propaganda to point to and to push their anti-Muslim narrative and anti-Palestinian narrative. So it makes no sense that after the outpouring of sympathy for Palestinians exposing Israeli crimes, and that a country that recently recognized a Palestinian state, that Muslims or pro-Palestinian activists would think it would be a good thing to undertake this type of attack. It's not, it's forbidden, and it's just utterly stupid. Look, if terrorism is undertaking acts of violence against civilians in order to achieve a political result, then the only ones who achieved a political result was the Zionists from this particular attack. It simply feeds into their propaganda. Thus, it makes no sense for Muslims or pro-Palestinian activists to undertake these actions or these types of actions. Look, we don't know the full reasons and the full information regards to the perpetrators behind this act. Maybe we will never know fully. But the history of Zionist false flags, Hannibal directives, and Western governments hiding facts, there's sufficient question marks as to why this attack would take place if done by Muslims. And as a final point, we don't blame all Jews for the actions of Zionists, even when they claim their Torah justifies their genocide. In the same way, we don't blame all Christians because of claims of Christian Zionists and their particular interpretation of Christianity. So even if this act was done by Muslims, no Muslim needs to apologize for this act. We don't need lessons from those who perpetrate and support violence about condemnation of violence. We are consistent. We'll condemn and criticize anyone, including Muslims, if they perpetrate immoral acts of violence. But what we see in the West, particularly by the pro-Zionists, is selective outrage. Calls for Muslims to condemn terrorist acts while they justify and even conduct a genocide and terrorist acts themselves. Their hypocrisy is as clear as day, and their inconsistency is absolutely clear too.